The elevator doors opened on the 37th floor, and Calla felt it before she saw anything. Not a sound, not a sight, just wrongness. The kind that lives in your chest before your brain catches up. The kind your body knows first. Registers in the small hairs along your arms and the sudden tightness behind your sternum, before any single piece of evidence has been presented to justify it. She stepped into the hallway. Her heels clicked against the marble. 37 floors above the city, the building hummed its usual hum. Climate control, distant traffic, the low mechanical breath of a place designed to feel expensive and permanent. Every light fixture exactly where it always was. Every door along the corridor closed exactly as it always was. The carpet running down the center of the hallway, pressing back against her step exactly as it always did. Everything exactly as it always was. Except it wasn't. She could hear laughter from inside the apartment. Warm, easy, female. The kind of laughter that belongs to someone who is comfortable where they are, who is not visiting, but occupying. Calla stopped, walking. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. She told herself she was being irrational. Long, weak, enormous pitch. 12 hours of conference rooms and recycled air, and client dinners that dragged themselves 2 hours past, when anyone genuinely wants to be there. She was exhausted down to her bones. She was reading into sounds. She was constructing a problem from an echo and a feeling, and a week that had already asked too much of her. She kept walking. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. When Bram was home, he'd laugh at her for locking it. Say, "We live on the 37th floor, Cal. Who exactly do you think is climbing up here?" She had never found it funny. She found it considerably less funny now, standing in the hallway with that laughter still drifting through the gap between door and frame, with the wrongness in her chest having graduated from suspicion to something heavier. She pushed the door open. The living room hit her like a photograph. Every element placed, every detail arranged with the kind of deliberateness that doesn't happen by accident. The lamps were on the warm ones, the ones she had chosen herself from a small shop in Copenhagen, because she liked the way they turned the whole room into something that felt like candlelight, like intention, like home. The skyline spread out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city laid flat and glittering and indifferent, as cities always are to what happens inside the rooms that face them. On the kitchen counter, 2 glasses of sparkling cider sat side by side, full, catching the light, like a toast waiting to happen. And there they were. Delaney stood near the window, mid-20s, dark hair pulled back simply. One of those faces built for a particular kind of calm, the kind that reads as effortless, but requires considerable effort to sustain. She was wearing a cream-colored dress, soft and unhurried, the kind of garment chosen for exactly this kind of moment. Her hand rested on her stomach, not fidgeting, not self-conscious, just resting, deliberate and visible and impossible to miss, on her stomach, which was round, which was very, very round. Calla's brain stopped producing complete sentences. Bram stood across the room. He didn't move toward her. He didn't reach for an explanation, or arrange his face into guilt, or search her eyes for a reaction he could manage. He didn't look caught. He didn't look ashamed or panicked, or any of the things a person should look when the life they built alongside someone is visibly, irrevocably fracturing. He looked the way he looked in his boardrooms, prepared, measured, already positioned 3 steps ahead of the person who had just walked through the door. He looked at her calmly, and he said, "You're home." Not, "I can explain." Not, "This isn't what it looks like." Not even her name spoken 10,000 times in 10,000 different registers, tender and urgent and laughing and quiet. Just You're home. Spoken as a statement of fact rather than a greeting. Acknowledged rather than welcomed. And in 2 words, Calla understood something that would take hours to fully process, but arrived in her body as immediate and total. She wasn't that she hadn't been for longer than tonight. That whatever this apartment had been, whatever they had been quietly redefined in rooms she didn't know existed, in conversations she was never invited into. And she was standing here now as the last person to receive information that everyone else in this room had been carrying for some time. Here is what I know about betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a storm that gives you time to prepare, to board the windows, to move the things you love to higher ground. It arrives like a door, opening on a night you expected to be ordinary. One small, quiet click, and then the cold comes in, all at once. Have you ever stood in a room full of your own things, your choices on the walls, your taste in the lighting, your care in every corner, and felt, without warning, like a stranger in it? Have you ever looked at the person who has known you most completely and understood, with a clarity that arrives too fast to be gentle, that you have been managed by them, that the love was genuine, and the strategy was also genuine, that a person can choose you and use you at the same time, sometimes with the same hands? That is where Calla was standing, on the marble floor she had selected, under the lamplight she had carried home from Copenhagen, across from the man she had built years of her life alongside, who had, it turned out, been building something else inside of it. The question that would follow her through everything that came next wasn't about Delaney, or the timeline, or the specific geography of when Bram had stopped choosing her. Those details would come. The question, the one that actually mattered, was this: what does a woman do when the betrayal is this calm, this prepared, this completely unbothered by her presence? Stay with me. Welcome to the channel. I'm so glad you found your way here, and I need you to stay, because this story has only just opened its first door. If you're new, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what we bring you. What unfolds from this hallway moment will change the way you think about trust, preparation, and what a woman is truly capable of when she decides that she is done being surprised. Now, back to the 37th floor. Calla didn't move. She stood in the doorway with her bag still on her shoulder, and the city still glittering behind the glass, and Bram still watching her with that boardroom face, patient, composed, already past the part where her reaction was going to change anything he had decided. She waited for something else. Another sentence, a softening. Some version of what people say when they have done something they know requires explanation, the hesitation, the reach toward accountability, the human instinct to at least gesture toward remorse before asking someone to absorb damage. Nothing came, so she stepped fully inside. She set her keys on the hook by the door. The hook she had installed herself on a Sunday afternoon because Bram kept leaving his keys in different places, and she had thought, quietly and without resentment, I'll fix this. I'll just make it easier for both of us. And she looked at him steadily and said, her voice low and controlled, "What is this, Bram?" He exhaled, not the exhale of a man caught in something he regrets, the exhale of a man who has been waiting for a particular conversation to begin, and is relieved that the waiting is finally over. His shoulders dropped a fraction, the physical release of someone setting down anticipation, not guilt. "I've been pretending for too long," he said. "I'm done pretending. I'm done hiding. That's not fair to anyone in this room, not to you, not to Delaney, not to the baby." He said the baby the way you reference an agenda item, like a line in a document he was finally reading aloud. His voice carried no tremor in it, no awareness that those 3 words had just rearranged the entire architecture of the room. "I need you to be out by the end of the week." Calla heard the words separately before she heard them together. Her mind processed them, the way you process something you understand linguistically but weren't structurally prepared to receive. There was a half-second delay, a small gap between the sound and its meaning, and then the meaning arrived in full, and it was not small at all. End of the week. 5 days. In the apartment where her books were arranged on shelves, she had measured and leveled herself. Where her coffee mug sat in the cabinet third from the left, because that was the cabinet closest to the kettle, and she had decided that made sense. Where her grandmother's photograph sat on the windowsill in the exact spot where the morning light hit it best, because she had tested 3 different positions before she found the right one. End of the week. She looked at Delaney. Delaney looked back. And Calla had expected, not hoped, not assumed, but simply expected as one human being extending a baseline assumption toward another, some version of visible remorse. Downcast eyes. A hand pressed briefly to a mouth. The ordinary instinct to appear, when standing in the presence of someone else's pain, at least somewhat affected by having contributed to it. Delaney offered none of that. Instead, her chin lifted slightly, barely perceptible, but there, her hand remained where it was on her stomach, steady and deliberate, not the unconscious gesture of a woman self-conscious about her body, but the considered positioning of someone who understood exactly what that image communicated to the other person in the room, and had made her peace with using it as a statement. "He told me you'd be mature about it," Delaney said. Her voice came out evenly, almost gently, the way a final sentence lands gently when the person delivering it already knows the verdict. "He said you were practical, that you'd understand." And there it was. The second wound slipped cleanly beneath the first one, because she wasn't simply telling Calla how to behave. She was informing her that Bram had already predicted her behavior, that the two of them had discussed it, that somewhere in a conversation Calla had never been part of, in a room she'd never been invited into, her reaction to this moment had been anticipated, scripted, and filed away under not a problem. Practical. He had described her as practical, as though she were a process, a system, something designed to keep functioning, regardless of what was fed into it. Bram's eyes moved to her face then, and he said the sentence that Calla would hear afterward in the quietest parts of her nights, rising up between sleep and waking without invitation. "You'll land on your feet. You always do." He said it the way you tell someone, "The traffic on the bridge is moving well today." Casually, cleanly, without hesitation wrapped around it, or malice dressed through it. Just a confident, comfortable sentence delivered by a man who had taken the best thing about her, the part that had carried her through every difficult season of her life, that got back up, that kept going, that refused to stay broken, and had used it as his justification for leaving because she would survive it. He was entirely certain of that, and his certainty, apparently, was enough to release him from any further obligation toward her. "You'll land on your feet," as though surviving a wound is the same thing as not being wounded, as though resilience cancels out the need for accountability. Calla looked down. Her hands were steady. She noticed that before anything else that her hands were not shaking, that her breathing was still arriving and leaving at its regular pace, that her body had chosen, without consulting her, to hold itself together in the presence of people who were counting on it to fall apart. She reached up, slowly pulled her tote bag from her shoulder and set it down on the floor beside her, gently, without a sound, without force or theater, or any of the dramatics that the room seemed to be waiting for. It was such a small movement. Neither Bram nor Delaney likely registered it as anything beyond what it appeared to be. But for Calla, it was the only thing she could fully govern in a moment that had removed every other option, the one deliberate, private act of self-control that kept everything else from spilling. The choice not to throw it. The choice not to perform her devastation for an audience that had already decided what she was going to do next. Never sign your future away just because you're in love. Her grandmother's voice, rising from somewhere beneath the noise of the room, beneath the weight of the cider glasses and the cream-colored dress and Bram's composed and unbothered face, clear as a struck bell, precise and unhurried. She had said it once at a kitchen table in a house that smelled like cardamom and old wood, watching a young Calla read a letter from a boy who would later become her first real heartbreak. She hadn't said it unkindly. She had said it the way she said most things that carried weight, factually, without performance, as though she was simply naming something that had always been true and would continue to be true long after the conversation ended. Never sign your future away just because you're in love. Love is real. It's also not a contract. Know the difference. Calla had smiled then. She had been 19 years old and completely certain that the love she was going to build would be the kind that made that advice unnecessary. The kind that was the exception. The kind that earned the right to be the exception. She was not smiling now. She was standing on the marble floor she had chosen, under the lamplight she had carried home, across from the man she had loved completely and chosen, deliberately and believed in specifically, and she understood, with the kind of understanding that doesn't ask for your permission before it arrives, that she had signed, not a document, not anything, with a notary and a witnessed line, something more total than that. She had signed in the way people sign when they stop keeping accounts because the trust feels large enough to make accounting feel like an insult to the feeling. She had signed her comfort and her daily rhythms and her financial assumptions and her sense of what the future was shaped like. And Bram was informing her now, in a voice that hadn't found reason to shake once, that the terms had been revised without her. Some people mistake softness for weakness. She could see that clearly now, with the particular clarity that only arrives when something opens completely, and the light enters whether you are ready for it or not. They watch you absorb difficulty without theater, and conclude that you don't truly feel it. They watch you keep your voice level, and your hands still, and they decide that your composure is evidence that the cost for you is lower, that you mind less, that you are built the way certain things are built for reliable use, without complaint, without the inconvenience of needing to be considered. Bram had made that mistake. She could see it plainly, and what she could also see quieter, steadier, arriving just beneath the grief of the moment, was that his mistake was about to become his problem entirely. She picked her tote bag back up, settled the strap onto her shoulder, looked at Bram, with a gaze so completely calm that it likely unsettled him in ways that tears never would have, and she said nothing. Not yet. Let's go back. Because Calla didn't arrive at that doorway by accident, and the woman standing in that lamplight, bag on her shoulder, hands steady, eyes clear, didn't become that woman overnight. To understand what she did next, you have to understand who she was first. And who she was someone who had loved Bram completely and knowingly, which is the harder kind of love to walk away from, the kind that costs more on the way out, precisely because it was genuine on the way in. The proposal happened on a rooftop, not this apartment, a different one, earlier in their lives together, smaller, the kind of place where the windows stuck in summer and needed a firm palm and a particular angle to open properly, where the radiator knocked all through winter in a rhythm you eventually stopped hearing because it became part of the texture of home, the kind of apartment that by every objective measure was imperfect, and that you loved unreservedly anyway because you were building something inside it that felt larger than the space. Bram had strung lights along the railing, warm ones, small, close-set bulbs that blurred softly at their edges when you looked at them directly, the kind that turn an ordinary rooftop into something that feels chosen, curated, intentional, the kind that make everything they touch look like a memory while it is still in the process of becoming one. Calla had pushed through the rooftop door and stopped walking immediately. The city opened up in every direction around them. lights stacked against the dark, in every window of every building, 1,000 other lives going on simultaneously and entirely indifferent to this one specific moment on this one specific rooftop. And Bram was standing at the center of it, holding a ring that gathered every available fragment of light and returned it multiplied, catching it from the small bulbs along the railing and the glow of the skyline and throwing it back, like something private and luminous. He said her name first, just her name, before anything else, in the voice he used only when he meant something completely. And she had crossed the rooftop to him, and he had asked. And she had said yes before the sentence was fully formed, because she already knew her answer with the certainty of something long decided, and she saw no reasonable purpose in making him wait for what she was entirely sure of. She had meant it, every syllable of it, without qualification. That matters. It needs to be stated plainly here, because the shape of what comes later could make it easy to forget Calla had loved Bram with her whole self, not with the softened, hedged, self-protective version of love that keeps one foot outside the door as a precaution. Fully, with both feet inside. She had loved him with the kind of commitment that requires actual courage, because real love always does. She had made him soup from scratch when he had the flu and couldn't lift his head from the pillow without the room tilting, not from a carton, from actual ingredients, because she knew he could taste the difference, and she wanted him to taste the difference. She had sat across from him at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. when a deal collapsed, and the failure sat on him like something physical, and she had looked him directly in the eye and told him, with specificity and without flattery or exaggeration, every concrete reason she believed in him, not a general reassurance, a particular one, because she knew him well enough to be particular, and she understood that generic comfort is a kindness, but being seen is something else entirely. She had rearranged her morning routine around his schedule, without being asked. She had moved her bookshelves to make room for his. She had carried her grandmother's photograph from apartment to apartment, and always found the best light for it, and she had made every space they shared in something worth returning to, not for appearances, not for guests, but because she believed the places you come home to should feel like they were made with care. She had made room for him, in every sense of the phrase, and she had watched him closely while she did it, because Calla also knew Bram. Not the version he constructed for rooms full of people he wanted to impress, the confident handshake, the quick and generous laugh, the dinner tab picked up without hesitation, the way he made every person in a conversation feel briefly like the most important one. She knew the other version, the one visible only in the unguarded moments, the ones he probably never considered she was cataloguing. She had watched him end a decade-long business partnership over a text message, not a call, not a meeting, a text, sent between other things, followed by a return to whatever he had been doing before. She had watched him speak about a mentor, someone who had opened genuine doors for him in the early years, someone he referenced with warmth and what appeared to be real gratitude, and then witnessed him remove that same man from a significant deal without a conversation, without a phone call, without the basic dignity of an explanation delivered in real time. She had asked about it once, choosing her words with care. Bram had looked at her evenly and said, "That's business, Cal." He hadn't said it with cruelty or defensiveness. That was the detail she carried with her long after the conversation ended, not that he had done it, but that it had cost him nothing visible, that the warmth returned to his face immediately afterward, like a screen that refreshes itself without retaining what came before. He released people he had finished needing. He did it efficiently. He called it pragmatism, and he moved forward without looking back, because looking back was not something his particular architecture required. Calla had noted that, filed it away without labeling it, without building a case from it, without allowing it to poison what was genuinely good between them, just as information, the kind that love doesn't erase, even when you would prefer it to, even when you are happy, and the lights are warm, and the city is beautiful from the 37th floor, and everything between you feels solid, the kind that sits quietly at the back of a mind that has not forgotten how to think clearly simply because it is also feeling deeply. 3 years before she moved into the 37th floor apartment. 4 years before the rooftop and the ring, and the word yes, spoken before the question finished forming. A letter arrived from a solicitor's office, and with it, her grandfather's inheritance. Her grandfather had built a construction company from nothing, from early mornings and physical work and decades of showing up to things that were difficult before they became reliable. His hands had aged long before the rest of him did, and he had worn that fact without complaint because he understood that the things worth having are generally built at some cost to the person building them. He had grown the company steadily without rushing it, without overextending it, and he had sold it at precisely the right moment, not too early, not too late, with the same unhurried precision he had applied to every decision that mattered in his life. And he had left the proceeds to Calla, structured and protected and specifically designated, not to the broader family, not distributed across multiple names, to Calla, because he had watched her over the course of her entire life and arrived, in the way that people who have built things from nothing sometimes arrive at conclusions about people, at the quiet certainty that she was the one who would understand what to do with it. He had not been wrong. Calla did not spend the inheritance quickly. She did not invest it casually or emotionally, or in response to anyone else's suggestions about what made sense. She held it for the better part of a year, turning the decision over with the patience of someone who had learned from people who built things slowly and kept them. And then, without announcement, she bought property, a building, modest in scale, but sound in structure, 4 units, solid bones, a location that a good realtor had helped her identify as one that would appreciate, rather than plateau. The kind of asset that does its work while you are doing yours, that grows in the background of a life rather than demanding to be its center. She worked with a realtor she had researched carefully, and a solicitor who asked the right questions and didn't rush the answers, and together they prepared a deed that carried one name on its ownership line. Hers, not Bram's. She had been with Bram by then, deeply, genuinely with him. The rooftop was still ahead of them, but the love was already fully present, already the thing she organized her life around, and she remembers sitting at the solicitor's long table with the pen in her hand and the deed in front of her, and feeling something she has never been, entirely able to name, not suspicion of Bram specifically, not fear of the future they were building, but something older and quieter than either of those things, something that arrived in her grandmother's voice and her grandfather's steady, careful hands, something that said, "Sign your name here, and only your name, not because you don't trust the love, but because the love is not a legal document, and you are wise enough to know the difference." She signed one name, hers alone. She drove home afterward and made dinner, and Bram came in from work and kissed her on the cheek and asked what smelled good, and she told him, and they ate together at the kitchen table with the windows open, and the evening coming in, and she did not mention the deed. Not that night, not in the weeks that followed, not across the years they built together in that apartment, high above the city. The document lived in a dark green folder in her home office, unremarkable in appearance, filed behind other paperwork the way the most consequential things often are, without fanfare, without visibility, patient and permanent, and waiting for the moment, if it ever arrived, when it would need to be more than paper, not as a trick, not as a contingency born of distrust, as protection, the kind her grandfather understood, the kind her grandmother had named plainly at a kitchen table that smelled like cardamom and old wood. Love should expand what is possible for you. It should open rooms in you that existed but were closed, make you more capable of things than you were before it arrived, add dimension to a life that was already yours. What love must never be permitted to become is the thing that owns you, the thing that, if it fractures, takes the ground with it. What Calla had understood, not bitterly, but clearly, she had loved Bram completely. She had also kept the ground. Both things had always been true. She had never seen them as contradictions. And now, standing in the apartment she had made into something worth returning to every evening, with Bram's deadline still in the air, and Delaney still in the room, and the city still indifferent beyond the glass, that dark green folder was sitting exactly where she had left it, patient, permanent, ready. Before we move into what Calla does next, and you need to stay with me, because what comes out of that home office will completely reframe everything you've watched happen in this apartment tonight. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Ring the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll be back in that apartment in just a moment, and the next 60 seconds of this story will change the entire shape of it. Calla left the room the way water leaves quietly, completely without announcement. No raised voice trailing behind her. No door pulled shut with emphasis. No parting line designed to land while she was still visible. She simply turned from the living room and walked down the corridor toward her home office, her footsteps measured and unhurried, her shoulders carrying none of the weight that the room had just tried to place on them. Bram said nothing as she left. Perhaps he assumed she needed a moment, that she had gone to collect herself, to press her palms against a cool surface and breathe through the shock, to do the private work of absorbing what he had delivered so cleanly. Perhaps he assumed she was crying. Perhaps he simply waited with the particular patience of a man who has already decided how a situation resolves, and is merely allowing the other person time to arrive at the same conclusion. He had no idea where she was actually going. She opened the office door, crossed to the desk, reached past the ordinary paperwork, the utility correspondence, the receipts she kept meaning to file, the miscellaneous accumulation of a life administered from this desk, and found the dark green folder exactly where it had always been, exactly where she had placed it years ago, with a steady hand and a clear mind, and the quiet understanding that she hoped never to need it, and was glad to have it regardless. She lifted it, held it at her side, walked back, down the corridor. The living room received her return in silence. Bram stood where she had left him, posture still carrying its comfortable authority. Delaney remained near the window, her hand still resting where it had been, the city still bright and indifferent behind her. The 2 glasses of sparkling cider sat on the marble counter exactly as they had been, full positioned, waiting to celebrate something. Calla walked to the counter. She set the folder down beside the glasses. The marble received it with a soft, clean sound. Not dramatic, not heavy, just the precise, definitive sound of something being placed exactly where it belongs. The cider glasses caught the light and threw it back warmly. The folder did not sparkle. It didn't need to. Bram's eyes moved to it. His expression carried a version of amusement. The particular brand that belongs to people who have decided the person across from them has nothing left to play. His mouth shifted into the beginning of a dismissive smile, the smile of a man watching someone reach for something he has already calculated holds no real weight. He gave a small laugh, brief and unguarded, the sound of certainty. "What is that?" he asked, casual, almost indulgent, as though she had produced a prop rather than a document. Calla didn't answer immediately. She opened the folder. The top sheet caught the light from the Copenhagen lamps, the same warm light she had chosen, carried home, installed in the room that she had made into something worth being in. The paper was clean and official, and entirely uninterested in the feelings of anyone present. She slid it across the marble, slowly. No performance attached to the movement, just a document traveling across a surface from one side to the other, the way documents do when they have something to say that conversation cannot improve upon. Bram looked down. His eyes moved across the top of the page with the initial speed of someone skimming something they expect to dismiss. Then the speed changed. The skimming became reading. The reading became something else, a stillness that started at his eyes and traveled downward through the rest of him, arriving in his hands last, which stopped their easy movement and came to rest against the counter's edge. He read the name on the deed. One name, her name, alone on the ownership line without a conjunction following it, without another name attached to it by Anne, and that would have changed everything about what the document meant. Just Calla. No N, no shared line, no partnership recorded in ink. His confident expression found its edge. The lines around his mouth rearranged themselves not into guilt, not into sorrow, but into the particular expression of a person whose calculation has just returned an answer they did not account for. His jaw held. His eyes moved back to the top of the document and traveled its length again, more slowly this time, with the thoroughness of someone searching for the error that would restore the outcome they had planned. There was no error. Calla watched him read it twice. She did not rush him. Then she leaned forward, just slightly enough that her voice didn't require volume to reach him clearly across the counter that separated them. "You're standing in my home." 4 words, no flourish, no elevation of tone. Just 4 words laid down with the same quiet authority as the document itself, clean, direct, requiring nothing additional to be understood. The effect of them on the room was immediate and total. Bram's earlier demand, end of the week, spoken with the ease of a man accustomed to setting terms, now sat in the air between them, rearranged into something else entirely. Something that no longer belonged to him. Something that had been returned, without ceremony, to its rightful owner. Delaney turned her head. The composure she had maintained throughout the entire evening, that studied, deliberate calm that had held through Calla's arrival and Bram's declaration, and every charged exchange that followed, finally found its limit. Her smile, which had been a fixed and careful thing, disappeared. Not gradually. It simply was there. And then it wasn't, the way light leaves a room when the source is removed. Her eyes moved to Bram, not with the ease of a partner checking in, but with the sharp, searching movement of someone suddenly needing to verify information they had accepted without sufficient examination. "You told me this place was yours," Delaney said. Her voice had changed. The evenness was still present, but underneath it now was something raw and recently exposed. The sound of a person realizing that the map they had been handed does not match the territory they are standing in, that the version of events she had been given, curated and edited, and presented with enough confidence to be accepted as complete, had been missing its most significant detail. She had been deceived, too, not in the same way as Calla, but deceived nonetheless, given a story with a critical page removed, trusted a narrator who had reasons to revise the truth before sharing it. Bram's hands lifted. The instinct to argue engaged before the strategy for it had fully formed. His mouth opened and the tools arrived in the order they always did. The references to marriage, to shared life, to legal complexity, to the years that surely counted for something in any reasonable accounting of the situation. The implication that paper could be contested, that circumstances altered what documents stated, that he was not without recourse. The words came out and met the deed lying on the counter, and stopped, because the deed was not interested in his tools. It did not respond to confidence or charm, or the particular force of a personality accustomed to moving rooms toward its preferred conclusion. It simply remained where it was, on the cold, hard, even surface of the marble counter, in the warm light of the apartment it described, stating one name, in clear print, with the patience of something that has never needed to raise its voice because it has never needed to. Calla straightened. Her bag was still on her shoulder. Her hands were still steady. She looked at Bram with the same clear gaze she had held since the moment she walked back into this room. Not triumphant, not heated, not performing a victory for an audience. Just present, just certain, just entirely, unmistakably herself. The life lesson that lived inside this moment needed no narration to be felt in the room. Quiet people, when they finally speak plainly, land with a force that startles those who mistook their silence for absence. Those who read composure as passivity, who interpreted patience as compliance, who assumed that because a person did not announce their preparations they therefore had none, those people tend to discover their error at exactly the moment it is least convenient to discover it. Bram had mistaken Calla's stillness for surrender. The deed on the counter was the correction. And the room, the warm, carefully lit, 37th floor room that had belonged to her long before tonight, and would continue to belong to her, long after, held that truth without comment, without drama, without any further assistance required. The apartment held its breath. Even the city beyond the glass seemed to pull back slightly, as though the usual press of sound and movement against the windows had recognized that something was resolving itself inside this room, and had chosen, for once, not to compete with it. The lamps held their warmth. The marble counter held its document, and Calla held the center of the room with the particular stillness of someone who has already done the hardest part and knows it. She looked at Bram, not with the searching quality of someone hoping to find something salvageable in his expression, just looked. The way you look at something you are, in the process of understanding completely. "You brought her here tonight," Calla said. Her voice was level. Not flat, not cold, but controlled in the way that a river is controlled by its banks. Present and moving and entirely directed. Not to be honest with me. Not because you believed honesty was something I deserved after everything we built together. You brought her here to corner me, to use my own home as the place where I had no choice but to accept whatever terms you had already decided on. Bram's jaw shifted. His eyes moved briefly to Delaney and back. A small, involuntary recalibration. The boardroom face was still present, but working harder now, requiring visible effort in a way it hadn't an hour ago when he'd delivered his end of the week with such comfortable ease. "You're making this into something it isn't," he said. His voice reached for its old authority and found it diminished. "This is just two adults having a difficult conversation." "3 adults," Calla said quietly, "and only one of them chose this room, this night, this arrangement. That wasn't me. And it wasn't Delaney. She let that land where it needed to. Then she turned, not away from Bram in dismissal, but toward Delaney in a movement that was deliberate and considered the kind of turn that requires something from the person making it. That costs something. Because extending genuine consideration toward someone who has been positioned against you is not a small or easy thing. Delaney was watching her, with an expression that had shed every layer of its earlier composure. What remained underneath was younger and less certain, a face still processing the gap between the story she had been given and the room she was actually standing in. Calla's voice, when she spoke to her, was different, not softer exactly, but without edge, human, in a way that the circumstances didn't require, and she chose anyway. "Delaney," she said, "I don't know what he promised you. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I know the full shape of what you were told, or what you believed, or what you were hoping tonight would look like. That's not mine to assume." Delaney's eyes held hers, waiting. "What I do know," Calla continued, "is that you deserve a future built on something true, not on a version of events that had pages missing, not on a foundation that required someone else's humiliation to pour it. Whatever comes next for you, and I mean this without cruelty, It should be built on what's actually real, because you're going to need real. Especially now. Her eyes moved, briefly and without malice, to Delaney's rounded stomach, not as a weapon, as an acknowledgement, as one woman recognizing that another was standing in a harder position than she may have fully understood when she agreed to be here tonight. Delaney's mouth pressed together. Her eyes glistened, but did not overflow. She gave a small, tight nod. Not agreement exactly, but the physical response of someone receiving something they hadn't expected and didn't know immediately what to do with. Bram stepped forward. The movement carried its old energy, the forward press of a man accustomed to reclaiming the center of a room by occupying more of its physical space. His voice dropped, took on the particular register he used when he wanted to remind you, without stating it explicitly, that he was not someone to be lightly managed. "You need to be careful," he said. "You're standing in a very precarious position here, and I think you know that. There are legal considerations. There are aspects of this that you haven't fully thought through." Calla looked at him. She did not step back. "Not 1 inch in my home," she said. "Yes." 2 words. The same quiet register. The same absence of performance, but carrying within them the full weight of every decision she had made in the years before tonight. Every signature, every considered choice, every moment of clarity she had maintained while also loving him completely. "In my home, yes, not a threat, a boundary, drawn not in the heat of the moment, but in the deed on the counter, in the solicitor's office years ago, in the hand that had signed one name and understood exactly why." Bram stopped moving forward. The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones that had come before it, not charged with what was about to happen, but settled into what already had. Calla looked between them at Bram, whose confidence had not disappeared, but had contracted into something tighter and less comfortable than it was used to being, and at Delaney, who was no longer performing anything, who was simply standing in the room as herself, perhaps for the first time all evening. She saw it clearly then. The thing she had sensed from the moment she pushed open the door and found the room arranged and the glasses poured, and both of them positioned so deliberately. Delaney had not been Bram's partner tonight. She had been his architecture, his evidence, his way of making the conversation feel concluded before it began, because a pregnant woman in a cream-colored dress, standing in the warm light of someone else's apartment, communicates something so visually complete that the person walking in is meant to feel, before a single word is spoken, that the decision has already been ratified by forces larger than any single objection she might raise. Delaney had been used, not only by the situation, but by the man standing beside her, positioned like a piece of a presentation, given incomplete information, and placed in a room where her presence was meant to do work she probably hadn't consented to do. Calla felt no satisfaction in seeing that, only the particular tired clarity of someone who has seen a thing for exactly what it is. "You can't build a happy future on someone else's humiliation," she said. She wasn't speaking only to Bram now. The words were for the room, for whoever in it still had choices to make about what they built next and on what ground they chose to build it. That kind of future doesn't hold. It doesn't grow into something good. It just accumulates the cost of what it took to pour the foundation. Bram said nothing. For the first time all evening, he had nothing prepared for what she was giving him. Calla looked at him for a long moment, at this man she had loved on a rooftop under string lights, who she had made soup for at midnight, who she had believed in at 2 in the morning when he needed it most. She looked at him with full recognition of all of that, and full recognition of what he had chosen to do with a love that had never been anything but genuine. Then she looked at Delaney one final time. "I hope you find what you're actually looking for," she said quietly. "I mean that. If this moment struck something in you, If you've ever been in a room where someone expected your silence to be permanent, tell me in the comments. Tell me what you felt. Tell me what you wish someone had said to you. This community is built for exactly those conversations, and your voice belongs here. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their stillness is not weakness. We're almost at the end of Calla's story, and the place it lands is one I think you need to reach. Calla turned to Bram one last time, not with heat, not with the kind of energy that requires an audience or builds toward a moment designed to be remembered by the people watching it. She turned the way you turn toward something you have finished with completely, finally, without the need for it to look like anything in particular. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough to move past the boardroom face he was still holding, past the careful architecture of composure he had assembled for this evening, and was now maintaining on considerably less structural support than when she had first walked through the door, long enough to see, beneath all of that, the man she had actually loved, the real one, the 2 in the morning one, the one who had stood on a rooftop under string lights and said her name before anything else. She saw him clearly, both versions, simultaneously, without needing to collapse one into the other to make the moment easier to navigate. She spoke quietly, not for Delaney, not for the room, just to him, the way she had always spoken to him when something truly mattered. I loved you when no one was watching. She let those words exist on their own for a moment, before anything followed them. Let them be what they were, not an accusation dressed as sentiment, not a weapon with a soft exterior, but a plain statement of fact, the kind that doesn't require decoration because its honesty is already complete. Not the version of love that shows up for the occasions, she continued. Not the kind that performs itself for rooms full of people who are watching. The kind that happens in the ordinary hours, the invisible ones, the ones that don't get remembered because nothing remarkable marks them except that someone chose to show up fully inside them. She looked at him steadily. I made you soup from scratch when you were sick because I knew you could taste the difference and I wanted you to have the better thing. I sat with you at 2 in the morning when the deals fell through and you couldn't say out loud how frightened you were, and I stayed until the fear had somewhere to go. I rubbed your shoulders on. The nights that the work had taken everything from you, and you came home with nothing left, I believed in you. Not generally, not as a performance of support, but specifically. I knew what you were capable of better than you did on your worst days, and I told you so, because it was true, and because you needed to hear something true. She paused, not for effect, just because the next thing needed its own space. The way you treat people in private, she said, is the real measure of who you are, not the dinners, not the handshakes, not the version of yourself you bring to rooms where it benefits you. To be generous and warm and impressive. The private moments, the ones with no audience, no return, no one keeping score, those are the ones that tell the truth about a person. Those don't lie. Bram stood very still. He had the look of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not plan to go, and is only now taking in the full geography of where he is. He said nothing, not because he had nothing. Bram always had something, but because whatever he reached for felt, for the first time in this conversation, genuinely insufficient. Calla looked at him for one final beat. Then she picked up her tote bag. She looked around the living room, not with longing, not with bitterness, just with the clear and present attention of someone acknowledging a chapter before turning away from it. The lamps she had chosen, the skyline beyond the glass, the 2 untouched glasses of cider on the marble counter, still waiting for a celebration that was not going to happen in this room tonight. She took it all in, then she let it go. She walked to the bedroom. Her hand found the door handle with the ease of 10,000 repetitions. She pushed the door open, stepped through, and closed it behind her. Not a slam, not a punctuation mark made of anger or finality or the desire to communicate something through force, just a soft, certain click. The same small sound the front door had made when she stepped in from the elevator, what felt like a lifetime ago, but was, by the clock, less than 2 hours, when the wrongness was still only a feeling in her chest, when everything was still almost ordinary. That click, the same one, but carrying an entirely different weight now. Behind the door, she crossed to the bed and sat down on its edge. Her bed, in her room, in her home, and she allowed the silence to be exactly what it was, without asking it to be anything more manageable. The grief came first. Of course it did. It arrived not as a dramatic wave, but as a weight. The kind that settles rather than crashes, that presses down into the shoulders and the sternum and the space behind the eyes, with the patient, total heaviness of something that has been waiting for a private room to enter. She did not redirect it. She did not reach for perspective or silver linings or the comfort of knowing she had handled the evening with grace. She simply allowed it to be present, because it had earned its presence. She had loved him, genuinely. She had given real things. Real time, real belief, real care delivered in real moments that no one witnessed and no one recorded, and that mattered entirely regardless. That love did not become retroactively false because of how he had chosen to end it. It had been true when she gave it. The loss of it was proportionate to that truth. Both deserved to be acknowledged. She let herself feel the sting of being misread so completely by someone who had known her so well. The particular disappointment of discovering that someone you loved privately and specifically had looked at all of that private, specific love and seen in it only reliability, only convenience, only the useful assurance that you would absorb difficulty without requiring him to account for it. That stung in its own particular way. She let it sting. And then underneath the grief, moving more slowly than everything above it, arriving the way things arrive when they have been true for longer than you realized and are only now being named relief, not the sharp, electric relief of escape, not triumph, dressed in quieter clothing, something slower and more fundamental than either of those things. The long, deep, cellular exhale of a person who has been carrying more than they consciously knew and has finally, in the privacy of a room with a closed door, been permitted to set it down. She had not lost herself. Through the love and the years, and the rooftop, and the late nights, and the soup, and the 2 a.m. conversations, and every ordinary hour, she had shown up fully inside. She had remained, quietly and entirely, herself. She had made room for him, without vacating the space she occupied. She had loved him, without signing away the ground she stood on. She had kept, in a dark green folder behind ordinary paperwork, the quiet evidence that she had never confused love with surrender. She was still here, still whole, still in possession of everything that had always been hers. The apartment, yes, but more than that, her clarity, her judgment, her grandmother's voice when she needed it, her grandfather's understanding of what things are worth and when to protect them, the particular hard-won knowledge of a woman who had loved with open eyes and prepared with steady hands and arrived at the hardest evening of her recent life without having given away the thing that made it survivable. That was not a small thing. That was, in fact, everything. She sat on the edge of her bed in her room in her home, and she breathed. And the city kept moving beyond the glass, and the grief sat with her, and underneath it the relief sat too, and she allowed both of them equal space because both of them were honest. And that, for tonight, was enough. One week later, Calla stood at the window. The same window, the same 37th floor, the same city moving below in its relentless, self-contained rhythm. The cabs and the pedestrians and the delivery trucks and the 10,000 small urgencies of people going somewhere that matters to them. None of it pausing. None of it adjusting its pace to mark what had happened inside this apartment 7 days ago. The city never does that. It never has. That is one of the things Calla had always quietly loved about it. Its absolute refusal to make anything more significant than it chooses to make itself. The cider glasses were gone. The counter was clean. The folder was back in her office, no longer waiting with the particular patience of something that has a purpose yet to be fulfilled, but resting now with the settled quality of something that has done what it was kept for and can simply exist again. The apartment felt different in the way that rooms feel different after something significant has moved through them, and out the other side, not emptier, not haunted, not marked by absence in a way that made presence feel insufficient, cleaner. That was the word. The way a room feels when old air has finally been replaced by new. Calla held her coffee with both hands and watched the city and breathed slowly and did not ask the morning to be anything other than what it was. And here is where I want to step forward and speak to you directly. Not to summarize what you just watched, not to package it neatly into points you can carry away in a list, but to say the thing that Calla's story has been building toward from the moment those elevator doors opened on the 37th floor, and she felt the wrongness before she could name it. This story was never really about a deed. It was never really about a man who underestimated the woman standing across from him, or a living room staged for a confrontation, or 2 glasses of cider poured for a celebration that never happened. Those are the details. They are true, and they matter, and they are what made the story feel real. But underneath them, this story was about 3 things that Calla carried long before any of this began, 3 things that were present in her before the rooftop, before the inheritance, before the dark green folder, before the evening that changed everything. The first was self-respect maintained in private, not the kind that announces itself or requires an audience to remain intact. The kind practiced in the quiet choices, the ones no one witnesses, the ones that don't benefit from being performed, the ones that cost something and are made anyway because you have decided in some foundational part of yourself that you are worth the consistency. Calla did not protect herself because she was suspicious of love. She protected herself because she respected herself enough to know that love, however genuine, is not a substitute for the ground beneath your feet. Self-respect is not armor against love. It is what allows love to exist in you without consuming everything else. The second was quiet preparation. Calla did not buy that property as a contingency plan born of distrust. She bought it because her grandfather had built something from nothing, and understood, in the way that builders always understand, that security does not arrive as a consequence of good intentions, it arrives as a consequence of good decisions made before they are urgently needed. There is a meaningful difference between anticipating the worst and simply refusing to be unprepared for it. One is fear operating as a life strategy. The other is wisdom operating as one. Calla chose wisdom. She chose it without drama, without announcement, without making it mean anything beyond what it actually was. A woman taking her own future seriously enough to protect it. The third is the one I want you to hold on to longest. It is the love that does not abandon its own standards in order to keep someone else comfortable. The love Calla gave Bram was real. It was specific and private, and delivered in the ordinary hours that no one witnesses and nothing commemorates. It was genuine in the way that the most valuable things are genuine without performance, without expectation of return, because it came from a place in her that knew how to give without needing the giving to be witnessed to count. That love did not make her foolish. That love held alongside clear eyes and steady hands, and a dark green folder filed behind ordinary paperwork made her formidable. The love and the preparation were never in conflict. They were always the same commitment to herself, to her life, to the standard she had quietly decided she would not fall below regardless of who was watching. Sometimes the person who tries to embarrass you is counting on you to panic. They design the moment for maximum disorientation. They choose the room and the lighting and the other people present and the timing, the end of a long week, the hour when you are tired and your defenses are worn, and the shock of what you are walking into has the best possible chance of stripping you of the clarity you would otherwise carry. They count on the gap between what you expected and what you found to make you a different, smaller, more manageable version of yourself. Calla did not give them that. She set her bag down gently. She walked to her office. She came back with a folder and set it beside the cider glasses and slid one piece of paper across a marble counter. And she let it speak in the only language that doesn't require volume to be authoritative. The plain, patient, undeniable language of a decision made clearly and recorded permanently long before it was needed. If you are in a season where someone is counting on your shock to produce your compliance, if you are standing in a room where the arrangement was designed before you arrived, and the outcome was decided without your input, hear this clearly. Your stillness in that moment is not weakness. Your refusal to perform your pain for the people who caused it is not indifference. Your preparation, however quiet, however unsexy, however unannounced, is not coldness. It is the most complete expression of self-respect available to you. It is the evidence that you took yourself seriously enough, long before the crisis, to do the unglamorous work of protecting what was yours. That is what Calla had, not luck. Not a dramatic confrontation she won on instinct. A dark green folder and years of steady private choices that no one knew to look for because she had never needed anyone to witness them to know they were worth making. The most powerful glow-up isn't revenge. It was never revenge. Revenge requires the other person to be present for it, which means the other person still holds something over. You still has the ability to give or withhold the reaction you need the situation to produce. Revenge keeps you tethered to the moment that hurt you. It makes the person who caused the pain into the audience for your recovery, which gives them a role in your recovery that they have not earned and do not deserve. Peace needs nothing from anyone. Peace is Calla at the window 1 week later, coffee warm and held with both hands. The city still moving below in its unhurried, indifferent, beautiful way. Her life still entirely and completely and legally and essentially her own. Not because she won an argument. Not because she delivered a line that landed well. Because years before any of this happened, in a solicitor's office with a pen in her hand and her grandmother's voice in her chest, she had chosen herself quietly, without announcement, without needing anyone else to understand the choice or validate it or witness it. She had chosen herself then, and that choice had been waiting, patient and permanent to matter. That is where this story lands. Not with a final cutting remark, not with a door slammed loudly enough to echo, with a woman and a window and the particular, unhurried quiet of someone who kept the ground beneath her feet and is standing on it still. In the morning light, in the city she loves, in the life that has always been and will continue to be entirely hers. If something in this story moved you, if there was a moment that landed somewhere specific, a line that named something you have been carrying without quite having the words for it, I want to hear from you. Leave it in the comments. Tell me the moment. Tell me what you are taking with you from Calla's story. Tell me if you know someone who needed to hear this today, and then share it with them, because these stories find the people they are meant for when we pass them along with intention. If you are not yet subscribed, do it now. Ring the notification bell so you never miss what we bring you next. This community exists for exactly these conversations about strength that doesn't announce itself, about preparation that looks like patience, about love that never required you to disappear inside it. I'm Mr. Tyrell. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for staying through every flaw of this story. Keep choosing yourself, quietly, wisely, and without apology.